A man in China's Zhengzhou city brutally attacked by what appear to be plainclothes police officers. That's as the man captures video of mourners gathering to pay respects after the city's subway flood disaster. Heavy rain and bad management aren't the only reasons behind the subway tunnel flood. An expert warned about another risk years ago, but the concern wasn't taken seriously. Authorities in one of China's flood-hit cities turned the area's electricity back on without warning. The result? Volunteers suffer severe electrical shocks while rescuing people from the floods. We examine the cozy relationship between Beijing and the Taliban. A Taliban delegation is now visiting China and meeting with top officials there. And the U.S. hardens its stance toward Beijing. The House passes a motion involving maps that show Taiwan as part of China. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. More updates on the aftermath of the Zhengzhou subway flood. A young college student there is crying out for help while being violently beaten up. He was reportedly using a drone to film local residents mourning the subway flood victims. Suspected plainclothes officers then violently slammed him onto the ground. A man quickly passed by in the video, his coat printed with the word police. The onlookers were angry over this. A resident kept arguing with the plainclothes to stop them. The young college student fell onto the ground, writhing. He said the suspected plainclothes officers had robbed his bag, but didn't show their police ID. Many got up and helped him to get back his drone. Many onlookers try to comfort the terrified college student. The suspected plainclothes officers have left the scene. It's rare for onlookers to defend someone against plainclothes in China. A Chinese netizen commented on the incident, saying, "I think there will be greater conflicts in the near future. More and more people are becoming aware of the nature of the Chinese Communist Party, or the CCP." Are heavy rain and bad management the only reasons behind the tunnel disaster in Zhengzhou? There is at least one more in play. The city's Jiangguan Road tunnel was flooded on July 20th. Hundreds of cars were soaked, and the real death toll is still unknown. Scientists said the stormwater pumping station didn't work on that day and worsened the problem. A Chinese media quoted a worker at the city's tunnel management and maintenance center. He said floodwaters entered the pumps and they couldn't work anymore. Water in the tunnel couldn't be pumped out. The paper said 3 years ago, an engineer of the city's engineering management office already pointed out the risk. He said the pumping station's electrical room was underground and can be easily flooded. He suggested putting it above ground, but that wasn't accepted. Experts also pointed out an emergency basin should be built under the tunnel to catch floodwater. The flooded tunnel does have it, but with a very limited capacity. Sun Jun, a scholar at China's Academy of Engineering, also commented on the catastrophe in Zhengzhou. He told the Chinese media when cities develop underground spaces on a large scale, they should build flood drainage networks accordingly. Thousands of people are still trapped in central China as floods continue to batter the region. Residents in the worst-hit city are not seeing any official rescue efforts. They have to count on either private sector volunteers or themselves.
Efforts to save residents in flood-hit Henan province appear to encounter setbacks. That's because authorities there either embezzle the donated supplies or sell them for profits. The Epoch Times interviewed a civilian rescue team leader, Mr. Yang, a team member and a local villager, to learn about the situation there.
It's all done by private volunteer organizations.
Yang says volunteers went to the localities to deliver supplies by themselves, but when they got there, no officials showed up to help distribute them. It's Yang's second time there. The military has taken over the area after he left the last time, but more people are reaching out to him for help.
I don't see what the government workers were doing, and we did many works. In the end, when it's nearly all done, the military came and took it over. They didn't really do the work, and we were all evacuated. With so many calls for help this morning, we re-entered the area.
Local residents also complain online that they didn't get adequate help from authorities. One post reads, "In the beginning, it was the young men protecting the dikes. Then it's men in the 70s and 80s. Then it's the ladies. And then it's 6- and 7-year-old kids. And all help out filling sandbags or picking up supplies whenever there is the need." Residents are desperate for rescue. Local resident Ms. Lee says many of them have been trapped in their flooded village for almost 6 days. They just got moved to a resettlement site.
The water was very deep and the entire city was flooded. All the furniture in the house was soaked. The water might be about 3 to 6 feet at the deepest.
Lee says the water doesn't seem to recede. Yang also says the rescue situation in the flooded area is very serious.
The entire city of Weihui was flooded, and now the entire rescue scene is chaotic. No one is directing or responding.
Despite the situation, local officials seem to be taking their opportunity to make money out of the disaster. Another volunteer, Ms. Wang, says she received a few calls from trapped villagers, saying they were getting ripped off. A local store owner told her that some donated supplies couldn't reach the victims. Some village chiefs and CCP secretaries took the supplies to their own homes. They would eat some of the food themselves and sell the rest. Wang says she is just a volunteer on the front line, but she is very sad to see how the villagers are suffering.
Don't trust their propaganda. You'll only see until you get to the front line that the victims could only depend on themselves.
Volunteers nationwide have rushed to the flooded areas to help. On Chinese social media, many are organizing on their own, from collecting information to donating supplies and money.
And Chinese volunteers got severe electric shocks while rescuing people amid the floods. That's because local authorities resumed power without warning. A Chinese chat group shows while the rescue teams were still working to save people in the water, the municipal government began to resume power. Now the electric shocks have hospitalized 8 volunteers. The post continues, "This is not a government, this is the underground." An urgent warning was posted in the chat group, saying all rescue teams immediately get out of the water. The Weihui municipal government has resumed the power supply. A reply says, "With all those people in the water, isn't it murder to resume power? The volunteers' conditions are currently unknown." Wednesday marks 45 years since one of China's worst earthquakes, 240,000 casualties and 160,000 injured. This is the result of the 1976 Tangshan earthquake. NTD's Don Ma has more.
45 years ago on July 28, 3:42 a.m., a powerful magnitude 7.8 earthquake shook Tangshan City in North China's Hebei province. In just 10 seconds, the industrial city of 1.5 million was reduced to ruins. The city's transportation, communications equipment, power, and water supply were crippled. Deaths exceeded 240,000 and more than 160,000 were seriously injured. A survivor of the earthquake tells NTD his first-hand experience. He recounts what he saw after escaping outside from his collapsing home. The earth cracked and cracked with a booming sound. It was like thunder, except that the sound came from the ground. Waves formed on the earth, rising and falling from high to low. The highest wave was 5 feet high. I was laying on the ground, trying to avoid it, but was knocked over several times. The earth wave swept across the village, and within 5 minutes, all the buildings were leveled. Wherever the earth wave went, the buildings collapsed. At the time, many experts in China had predicted that an earthquake was on the horizon. Hundreds of thousands of lives could have been saved had authorities taken heed of these predictions. But in the 1970s, CCP officials were preoccupied with other matters. Party leader Mao Zedong was critically ill, and the Cultural Revolution was in its waning days. This was a period when the centralized command economy was on the verge of bankruptcy, and when centralized political control in China was unstable. Some towns took the earthquake predictions seriously. In one town about 40 miles from Tangshan, authorities enforced earthquake precaution measures. It was after receiving information that a potential earthquake was coming. As a result, the town's entire population was saved. Don Ma, NTD News.
Coming up, a cozy relationship between Beijing and the Taliban. A delegation of the Taliban is in China, meeting with top Chinese officials. More on that after the break.
Don't let YouTube decide what information you get. That's your choice. YouTube is deleting our videos and cuts you off from a source of honest reporting. Make sure you don't lose access to NTD's news content, and take a quick moment to subscribe to our newsletter so no matter what happens here, you'll keep your access to a trustworthy news source.
A delegation of the Taliban is visiting China. They are meeting with senior Chinese officials, including China's foreign minister. Soraya Ali reports.
As American forces and their NATO allies withdraw from Afghanistan, Chinese officials are meeting representatives of the Taliban, who they say will play a, quote, important role in Afghanistan's future. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi met the 9-person delegation in the Chinese city of Tianjin. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Chao Li-tian.
Wang Yi pointed out that the Afghan Taliban is a pivotal military and political force in Afghanistan. It's expected to play an important role in peaceful reconciliation and reconstruction in Afghanistan.
Taliban delegations have also visited Iran and Russia in recent weeks. It comes as the group has seized several districts across Afghanistan and reports of escalating attacks on civilians. This was U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken on a trip in India Wednesday.
The Taliban says that it seeks international recognition, that it wants international support for Afghanistan. Presumably it wants its leaders to be able to travel freely in the world, sanctions lifted, etc. Well, the taking over the country by force and abusing the rights of its people is not the path to achieve those objectives. There's only one path, and that's at the negotiating table to resolve the conflict peacefully and to have an Afghanistan emerge that is governed in a genuinely inclusive way and that's representative of all its people.
Afghanistan shares a border with both China and Iran. As the security situation worsens there, peace talks in Qatar's capital have made little progress.
The U.S. House passed a motion on Wednesday regarding maps that show Taiwan as part of China. It's part of a spending bill for the State Department. The motion prohibits the department from spending funds to create, procure, or display any map that depicts Taiwan as part of the People's Republic of China. Wisconsin Congressman Tom Tiffany and 4 other lawmakers proposed it. Tiffany says this is a common sense measure, as we all know that Taiwan has never been part of communist China. He adds that the Taiwanese people elect their own leaders, raise their own armed forces, conduct their own foreign policy, and maintain their own international trade agreements. By every measure, Taiwan is a sovereign, democratic, and independent country. The bill is non-binding, but it does show what the lawmakers feel about Taiwan. The U.S. Navy sent this warship on Wednesday through the international waters separating China and Taiwan. It comes as tense conversations happen between the U.S. and China. The missile destroyer conducted a routine sail through the Taiwan Strait in accordance with international law. The journey demonstrates the U.S.'s commitment to a free and open Indo-Pacific. According to the U.S. Navy's 7th Fleet, the U.S. military flies, sails, and operates anywhere international law allows. This marks the 7th Taiwan Strait transit in 2021. There were 13 in 2020. The Chinese military responded, saying their Air Force and Navy had followed and monitored the U.S. warship the whole way. China appears to be expanding its nuclear capabilities. New satellite images show what researchers say is a new missile base in China's Xinjiang region, released alongside a report by the Federation of American Scientists. Researchers say it signals China's potential expansion of its nuclear arsenal, calling into question Beijing's commitment to its minimum deterrent strategy. It's the second apparent silo field uncovered this month in China, after another field was found under construction in neighboring Gansu province. China's Foreign Ministry and Defense Ministry have not responded to a request for comment. Some Chinese media outlets dismissed the reports, suggesting it was a wind farm. The British Foreign Secretary says it's unlikely he would go to the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing. He says it's due to human rights concerns around the situation in Xinjiang.
Well, we always say with this, we've asked this question about whether we would boycott because of human rights concerns in Xinjiang. That's the ultimate background to the question. First of all, for the athletes themselves, the Olympic Committee take those decisions. That's a matter of law, so those are independent. The reason we do that is we don't want to politicise sport. In terms of the diplomatic representation that we apply, I think we'll think very carefully about it. We do have those concerns, and I said I think it was unlikely that I would go. But we haven't taken a firm decision on that yet.
The United States is consulting allies on a shared approach to the Winter Olympics in Beijing amid criticism of the Chinese Communist regime and calls for boycotts over human rights abuses. Last week, a bipartisan group of U.S. lawmakers called on the International Olympics Committee to postpone the 2022 Winter Olympics and relocate the event, unless the Chinese regime ends its ongoing genocide against Uyghurs and other Muslim minority groups. Rights groups, researchers, former residents, and some Western officials have said Xinjiang authorities have facilitated forced labor and other abuses. In light of those details, we now turn to more positive news to look at what happens when one woman, who's a little on the quiet side, wants to share a beautiful message with the world. In this interview, we sit down with dancer Eden Zhu from Shenyun Performing Arts to find out how she's delivering her message to thousands of people loud and clear without uttering a word. A self-proclaimed introvert, Eden Zhu took no pleasure from speaking to strangers and had little desire to be in the limelight. But now, she's found herself center stage with thousands staring at every move she makes.
For dance, you have to use your body to express your emotions or a certain message in your heart that you want to deliver. If you're really introverted, then your dance will not touch people. So I have to open up my heart to communicate with the audience. Then my dance can really impact people.
Zhu is a principal dancer for Shenyun Performing Arts, a world-renowned classical Chinese dance company. The group's mission aims to revive 5,000 years of traditional Chinese culture, much of which was lost when communism took over. Zhu says she's personally felt the power of that culture. Now she wants to pass on the wisdom and messages contained in it to audience members around the world. She explains that her desire to share it transcends her own personality, physical restrictions, and even the pain of classical dance training.
I really like reading some ancient books. For example, I really like the sayings of Mencius. When heaven is about to place a great responsibility on one man, it always first frustrates his spirit and will exhaust his muscles and bones. I think this saying can really inspire people. That is when you want to do something. In fact, there will be corresponding difficulties in front of you. If you can't break through the difficulty, you will find that the opposite side of that difficulty is a very bright world.
Dancers often say you must dance from your heart. For Shenyun dancers like Zhu, their movements quite literally originate from the center of their bodies.
Shenyun, we use a lost technique called 身带手, or the body leads the arms, and 胯带腿, or the hips lead the legs. This means that the strength that powers your upper body's movements originates from the center of your body. Then it extends to your arms, then to your fingers. In this way, the bearing of Chinese classical dance becomes more grand. The upper body posture feels more expansive and gives people a very bright feeling.
Techniques aside, to best portray a character, a dancer also has to relate to the character's feelings. But this can be challenging. One example, Zhu plays the Chinese goddess of the moon. So as a human, how can you relate to a divine figure?
Because she is a being that's above the human level, her heart will certainly not be like a human being with so many emotions and desires. Her state of mind is probably very peaceful, very compassionate. So when performing this dance, my heart won't fluctuate too much. I will just try to display something purely beautiful.
She describes learning to achieve that state through studying tradition and self-cultivation.
The dancers of Shenyun are purifying themselves every day, bringing their thoughts back to righteousness step by step.
Zhu said this kind of self-improvement plus the content Shenyun presents are why audience members often report feeling hopeful and uplifted after watching the show.
For example, when the opening scene begins, they see a heavenly world with God in it. I think the audience will be very surprised when they see it. Because maybe in everyday society, people fight with and scheme against each other. One may feel that he lives a meaningless life inside. But when he sees a world that is completely different from his daily life, and it's a very beautiful heavenly world, all the bad things in his mind are swept away. He feels that what he sees is bright and beautiful. A sense of pure goodness and righteousness will arise in his heart. And he'll be able to take the low points that he encounters in life very lightly, because he knows that there are higher beings looking after us. So he may have a more positive attitude in facing life.
I'm deeply inspired and just profoundly moved.
Oh my gosh, it was phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal.
The show is so filled with light. It's exactly what this city needed.
Zhu says she's always felt sad that Shenyun can't perform in the birthplace of traditional Chinese culture. That's because China's current communist regime won't accept people of faith.
The culture propagated by the Chinese Communist Party is based on atheism. In this respect, it has abandoned the most fundamental thing about human beings. But the traditional culture we are talking about is a belief in God. The ancient Chinese people were respectful of the heavens and believed in the divine, and they had a yearning for the divine. That's why many Chinese arts in the early stages always portray God, and in the West too. They portrayed the nobility, greatness, and solemnity of divine beings.
Despite today's political clashes between the Chinese regime and the Western world, this may explain why many outside China still resonate with values from ancient China. Zhu says the inspiration of and appreciation for good arts originate from the same place.
The most important point of art is that it can purify people's hearts, enhance their divinity, and bring them closer to God.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. But before you go, we have a special report coming up this Friday. For years, cyber attacks have been a huge headache for the U.S. and its allies. Now, for the first time, they are formally calling out one of the biggest sources in charge behind the scenes.
New this morning, the U.S. is joining with allies around the world to call out the Chinese government for a series of cyber intrusions.
This prosecution is unique. This case is about a cyber hacking and economic espionage campaign led by the government of China.
In a special report, we look at just who are these Chinese hackers, how the regime uses the attacks to achieve their strategic goals.
Unsurprisingly, the intrusions targeted industries outlined in the Made in China 2025 plan.
How Beijing is building a massive database full of details about average Americans.
We're talking about people's health histories, their criminal histories.
And what tools the U.S. has to stop it.
Be sure to check it out on Epoch TV this Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern. China in Focus is partnering with the platform. That's where you can watch our exclusive content every Friday night. To subscribe, click epochtv.com/China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow.